want to welcome our grand jurors and our live stream viewing audience back to another hearing of the Citizens Grand Jury with our prosecutor, Larry Klayman. Larry, take it away.
Welcome to the 10th session of our Citizens Grand Jury. While the grand jury, a special grand jury, has been commissioned in New York City to indict Donald Trump by rabid leftist prosecutors hoping to take him out, we, the American people, are moving forward to legally and peacefully take out people who have committed crimes against the nation and against nature's law and nature's God. Today, we're proceeding with the indictment of Dr. Anthony Fauci. I use the term doctor loosely. Maybe it's closer to Dr. Frankenstein, if you're going to make a comparison, because this guy is truly a monster. And it's coming out this week. And this has been covered up for a very long time by both Republicans and by Democrats. We know, for instance, that the American people, hold on one second, Jason. Right back.
While Larry takes that call, we're just going to have a brief look at some video content. People may have seen the testimony before the Senate just yesterday. Anthony Fauci was questioned by several members. Okay, we've got Larry back with us.
I'm back. I was expecting an emergency call, but don't worry about it.
No problem.
To convene again, things happen in the course of things, is that both Republicans and the Democrats have covered up what went on at the Wuhan lab. The National Security Agency, the CIA, as you know, because I obtained 2 preliminary injunctions against the intelligence agencies under Obama and Biden, surveil everything that goes on, not just in this country, but around the world. They certainly knew or should have known, based upon obtaining telephone communications, emails, text messages. They can even get into encrypted accounts. They can get into everything, and they do. And that explains why, as much as I love President Trump, this is my personal statement here, is that he didn't proceed. He simply called names to communist China, the Wuhan flu, the Kukung flu, or whatever you want to call it. And it also explains why Biden, in part, when he was improperly elected president with a lot of rigged election systems, shut down an investigation which Trump had belatedly started under Secretary of State, apparently, Mike Pompeo. Shutting it down is also explained by the fact, because we've already indicted Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, and his brother James Biden for a massive racketeering bribery scheme of money coming from communist China, Ukraine, and Russia, is that Biden obviously was paying the quid pro quo back in shutting it down. It's why now he's been forced to conduct an investigation, quote unquote. But as you'll see from some of the video that we're going to play, what's coming out this week, the Republican Party needs something to hang its hat on because, frankly, it's politically and actually dead. It has no policies. It has no opposition to what the ultra-left has done in seizing control of this country. It needed to find something. So all of a sudden, they have discovered and they have given credence to what Dr. Judy Mikovits has been saying, what Kent Heckenlively has been saying, what another expert that we have, Francis Boyle of the University of Illinois, professor, has been saying. All of a sudden, they had to rediscover the simple fact that COVID-19 emanated from a laboratory in Wuhan, China, and it was most likely, that's the implication, we know it to be a fact, an engineered bioweapon. That's what the Wuhan lab does. That's what we do at Fort Detrick, Maryland as well. We create bioweapons, however illegal under international law. And in fact, that's what escaped after 9/11. That's been confirmed many times. The anthrax that killed several people came out of the lab at Fort Detrick. It was given by George Bush, the dad, Donald Rumsfeld, Defense Secretary, Dick Cheney, Darth Vader Dick, to Saddam Hussein, and somehow it got out, whether domestically or internationally. That's what happened. But this is the state of affairs. Why is it that Freedom Watch had to bring a class action lawsuit in Dallas, Texas for all of the health damage and for all of the economic damage and emotional damage that's been caused by the Communist Chinese. That case is going forward, although we are experiencing delays in getting service of process because the Communist Chinese thumbed their nose at service, and we have the magistrate judge there who typically is dragging his heels, so we're putting pressure on that. Our colleagues in Jerusalem, Israel, who brought a case, and Freedom Watch is a plaintiff there as well. I work closely with them, very fine people. Ari and Ruth Sheslovsky. In fact, they're on my radio show this week at freedomwatchusa.org. You can find it, talking about what's going on. The Israeli government intervenes and defends China as far as jurisdiction. It so happens that Netanyahu allowed for most of Israel to be bought by the Chinese. So apparently he has a quid pro quo as well. I love Israel. I'm a Zionist, but frankly, their government is as bad as ours in many respects in terms of protecting their own people. In fact, this is just a comment as an aside. You know, for 3 occasions, they have failed to finish off Hamas. They leave it to grow like a cancer. They bow down to Obama and now Biden. So we, the American people, need to take action ourselves peacefully and legally, and that's the basis of these citizens' grand juries. And this week, as I said, finally, the Republicans and Fox News, because they need something else to boost ratings, their ratings were going through the tank. Finally, they have discovered that Judy Mikovits, Kent Heckenlively, Francis Boyle, others have been telling the truth all along, despite the fact that everybody's been banned from social media for telling the truth. And at the beginning of this, the leftist media called us all conspiracy theorists. That's mild. I don't mind being a conspiracy theorist because conspiracies do happen. As the old expression goes, you know what happens. But they also called us heretics. They called us, crazy. Many people in world history have been called crazy and been proven to be correct. And the left, of course, did not want to dignify this because they worship at the altar of communist China and Russia. They're Marxists, so they have an affinity to the land of Mao. That's my comment. So we, the American people, need to rise up, and we will do it ourselves peacefully and legally. We are seeking the indictment of Anthony Fauci and also the communist Chinese, and we're continuing with that process today. Jason, run the videotape. If you have any comments, feel free to make them right now before we do. And we have the continued testimony of Dr. Judy Mikovits. We're also presenting the affidavit that was sworn to under oath by Dr. Francis Boyle of the University of Illinois. And we also have another doctor coming out of Paris, France, who will also testify to the same thing. There's no doubt that this was a bioweapon that was released either by accident or by design, and it has destroyed literally the United States and the Western world.
Larry, my only commentary before we begin is to remind people that these citizens' grand juries are made possible in part by the generous sponsorship of our viewing audience. People can go to freedomwatchusa.org and tap on the donate button. This is going to help Larry and his team at Freedom Watch continue to carry on with the work that we expect the Department of Justice to do, but they've been failing us badly, Larry. The other thing I want to remind people about is they can sponsor this channel at subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. And I also want people to make sure that they're aware that, Larry, you are going to be hosting a Third Continental Congress. That's coming July 5th of this year. So I hope that people will join us there. We're going to be looking at some video right now that was testimony provided yesterday. Let's start with the questioning of Anthony Fauci. And I apologize, I've been chasing this technical problem for more than a week. Give me just 1 second. And
with delegates declaring independence for a second time and also making some additions to our Constitution to protect the American people from what's been going on. But Jason, let's roll the videotape, as they say.
Here we go.
Madam Chairman, Chairwoman. Dr. Fauci, I believe you have testified that you didn't give any money to the Wuhan lab to conduct gain of function research. Is that right?
That is correct.
How do you know they didn't lie to you?
Excuse me, sir?
How do you know they didn't lie to you and use the money for gain-of-function research anyway?
Well, we've seen the results of the experiments that were done and that were published, and that the viruses that they studied are on public databases now. So none of that was gain of function. So
How do you know they didn't do the research and not put it on their website?
there's no way of guaranteeing that, but in our experience with grantees, including Chinese grantees, which we've had interactions with for a very long period of time, they're very competent, trustworthy scientists. I'm not talking about anything else in China. I'm talking about the scientists, that you would expect that they would abide by the conditions of the grant, which they've done for the years that we've had interactions.
So you don't think the Chinese would lie to you?
Well, when you say the Chinese are a rather broad group. I know the scientists that we've dealt with have been trustworthy.
You think all the scientists have told the truth in terms of the origin of the Wuhan virus and not been influenced by the Communist Party of China, do you?
I don't have enough insight into the Communist Party in China to know the interactions between them and the scientists, sir.
Right. Why are we giving them money in the first place?
Well, that's a very good question, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to
You're
answer
welcome.
it. Well, SARS-CoV-1 started in China, in Guangdong province, and it went from a bat to a civet cat to a human.
Yes, and excuse me, Doc, for interrupting you, but our time is so
Yeah,
limited.
no, I'm going to be real quick.
Our time is so limited. Why are we giving money to the labs in China to study virology?
Well, I'm going to give you a rather succinct answer to that, sir.
I appreciate that.
And that's why I was saying the SARS-CoV-1, clearly the bats that have the viruses, that are the coronaviruses, are in China. As I said a couple of times, it's not in Fairfax County, Virginia, or is it in New York? It's in China. So if you want to show and study, importantly, the animal-human interface,
Because that's where the bats are.
yeah, the
Okay.
bats. Where,
I
that's
got
where
it.
the bats
I
are.
want to be sure I understand your testimony. You didn't give money to the Wuhan lab to do gain-of-function research.
That is correct.
And you believe they didn't do gain-of-function research because they told you they didn't.
We've seen the results of the studies that they conducted, and they were not
including any
gain-of-function.
private studies.
Excuse me, including.
Any private studies.
I'm not sure what you're getting at, sir.
Well, here's what I'm getting at. You gave them money and you said, don't do gain-of-function research.
Correct.
And they said, we won't.
Correct.
And you have no way of knowing whether they did or not, except you trust them. Is that right?
Well, we generally always trust the grantee to do what they say, and you look at the results.
Have you ever
of
had
what
a
they-
grantee lie to you?
I cannot guarantee that a grantee has not lied to us, because you never know.
Yeah. Can we agree that if you took President Xi Jinping and turned him upside down and shook him, the World Health Organization would fall out of his pocket?
I don't think I can answer that question, sir. I'm sorry.
Well, do you think that the President Xi Jinping has undue influence over the World Health Organization, do you?
I have no way of knowing the influence of the president of China over the WHO.
Okay, so you think the WHO is a completely independent body, level playing field, call it like you see it, and they really want to get to the bottom of the origin of the virus. Do you believe that?
My interaction with the WHO and for Dr. Tedros, the Director General, has been one
Okay.
that I do believe he's a person of high degree of
I got
integrity.
it. I want to ask one last question. Why did you guys spike, not guys and ladies, why did y'all spike the prior administration's investigation into the origins of the coronavirus and whether it could have come out of the Wuhan lab?
Sir, we did not spike anything in the prior administration. I'm not sure what you mean by spike, but we have no influence.
The State Department spiked the prior administration's
Right.
study.
But that has nothing to do with the National Institutes of
So
Health.
they didn't consult with y'all?
They did not.
Did they consult with you, Dr. Collins?
I read about it in the press this morning.
Doc? They just spiked it without talking to their experts? You don't want to answer that one, do you?
I just read about it.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You know,
Let me make a
Larry,
comment on that.
I don't know what
I-
spiking
I
is.
think
Yeah,
but
spiking
whatever it
means
is, we didn't
kill.
do it.
It
We
means
didn't do
spit.
it, whatever it is.
Yeah, it means kill it. Now I got to say something as a converted Yankee to a Southerner who went to Duke University and Emory University School of Law and began my career in Miami and still practice in Florida. I'm very proud of my Southern colleague. I got to give credit where credit is due. You have to say that I think Southern trial lawyers get to the point very, very well, and Senator Kennedy made the point very, very effectively. Unfortunately, his colleagues in the Senate and in the House do nothing. All they do is talk. But, I give him credit for what he did. So let's move on, Jason, to the next videotape. And I'll even give Rand Paul credit, even though he's done nothing either.
This is an appearance Senator Paul made on Bill Hemmer's America's Newsroom yesterday, Larry.
To you.
Good morning.
You listen to the reporting there. What do you make of this? Why?
I think the most important thing is that the investigation can't be done by the WHO or an international group, but it also can't be done by Americans who are involved with funding the lab. So Dr. Fauci and his handpicked person from EcoHealth, they can't investigate themselves because they gave the money to the lab. They have a conflict of interest and a desire to make sure nothing bad is discovered that could have occurred with NIH money. So they can't be the investigators either. And this is very important. I think Dr. Fauci should be made to testify under oath about the money that was given to the lab. And the good news is yesterday I passed an amendment on the Senate floor that says no more gain-of-function money can be sent to China. This is very important because this could happen again. I mean, they are experimenting with the SARS virus, which is 15 times more deadly than COVID-19. COVID-19 kills about 1%, but that's been 3 million people, more than 3 million people. If SARS got out of the lab, that could be 50 million people. So this is a very important task ahead of us.
Okay.
We have 11 labs in our country that do this kind of research.
You raise a
of
number of interesting points. Let me see if I can knock off as many as I can in the next few minutes here. We are told that the NSC, the National Security Council, is the one that's running this investigation now. Is that acceptable?
I think it needs to be a bipartisan commission, not just the administration. I think really this should not be a partisan issue. And I think yesterday we demonstrated that Democrats will vote for some repercussions on this. But I don't know that the administration can investigate this, particularly since they've shut down the previous administration's investigation. So I'm worried that they're trying to cover up the government's involvement, our government's involvement in funding this research.
They would argue they haven't shut it down, and I mean, maybe it is just a question of whether it's in this silo at the State Department or in this silo over here at the National Security Council. Stand by for more on that. You mentioned Anthony Fauci. Here he was on the Hill about the funding for that lab in Wuhan and what was legitimate and what was not. Watch.
About $600,000 over a period of 5 years. So it was a modest amount. There was nothing in the grant application that would call for what is referred to as gain of function. Gain of function meaning taking a virus that could infect humans and making it either more transmissible and or pathogenic to humans.
Okay, so a couple things in there. Take the value of the dollars he mentioned, $600,000 over 5 years. Is that a lot? Does that matter?
Sure. Well, sure, it's a lot. And actually, there are some reports that it added up to millions over time. But the other thing he said is that there was no gain of function in the application. There are scientists who have looked at the application and absolutely and categorically disagree with him. They say the application did include gain of function. The other evidence we have is that Dr. Shi from the Wuhan lab published a paper that is clearly about gain of function. And in that, she thanks Dr. Fauci and his group for funding that paper. So there's a lot of contradictions going on. The bottom line is he cannot investigate himself. He was responsible for giving this money, so he has every incentive to cover it up and not reveal the truth about it, because if the pandemic did come from the lab, he would have great culpability in this. So he can't be investigating this, nor can any of his people that he picks be investigating this. He needs to be excluded from the investigation.
So you allege today this is a cover-up. Is that what I hear?
No, what I'm saying is that there could be a cover-up because there's an incentive by people like Dr. Fauci not to reveal anything, because he would be then culpable because he was in charge of funding this lab.
Okay, one more thing I want to squeeze in here. The National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, James Freeman wrote about this in the Wall Street Journal a few days ago. The quote from that group was, "It's impossible for us to be aware of, nor can we account for, all of their activities." Just final word on this, Senator.
I think that's true, and one of the strongest evidence that this came from the lab is they haven't been able to find the virus in any animal. They tested thousands of animals in the wet market. None of them tested positive for COVID. So there's a lot of things that need to be investigated. But so far, a lot of the evidence is pointing towards the lab.
Well, Senator, thank you for coming on today. It continues, okay? The mystery there deepens. Rand Paul from the Hill. Thanks.
This is very interesting. Rand Paul, first of all, is a doctor of medicine. He's an MD. He went to Duke University Medical School like his dad, Ron Paul. So he has medical background, so he understands. Number two, he talks about investigations. Now, when has any Republican or any investigation ever given the American people the truth in recent history? So don't expect that to happen either. In fact, the U.S. government has all the information, as I said. The National Security Agency, the CIA, they know exactly what happened. And it's not going to come out because Biden and Harris have been bribed to the hilt, Biden in particular, by communist China. And who knows what, if anything, the Chinese had on the Trump organization as well. Never came out. So this is the bottom line. We, the American people, need to rise up through our citizens' grand juries and hold them accountable. And in that regard, I present the testimony, the continued testimony of Dr. Judy Mikovits and her partner, Kent Heckenlively, who have written a variety of treatises on this issue. They are experts. And Judy, if you will please comment on what you just heard and amplify it, and there's something else that you wanted to bring to the grand jury's attention.
Dr. Judy, I think you might be on mute.
Yes, I am. Thank you. Yes, I think it's very interesting that Tony Fauci said it's not in Fairfax County, Virginia, because when in the 90s, when we worked with the Ebola from the bats in the Vero monkey kidney cells, the same cell line that was sent to China from Fort Detrick, where the no-seum technique was discussed in the last testimony. That some of that work that I did in the mid-90s was to understand by the direct infection of human cells what the difference was between the pathogenic and the pathogenic Zaire strain of the Ebola virus and the non-pathogenic Reston strain of the Ebola virus. Reston is in Fairfax County, Virginia. I grew up there, so at any rate, it was the cytokine storm was the molecular answer to that. I published it in Nature Communications. I don't know the exact year. It was before 2000. At any rate, that work, those cell lines were the exact cell line that was exchanged not only from the lab. And I gave this. Geez, that's not the talk I wanted to get, but at any rate, so don't worry about that one. Somehow my slides are mislabeled here, so I'll make sure we get this in another event. But if I could screen share, I don't know if that's possible on this technology.
I think it should work.
Okay, so let me try that, because there is a slide on the presentation I wanted to make that I just made this weekend for a talk I gave with Dr. David Martin at a meeting in a church called Glad Tidings Church. You can see the entire work there. Let's see if I can see this. Okay. It says the host disabled participant screen sharing.
Oh, I didn't actively do that, but I'm not sure how to undo it. Would you like to email the presentation to me, Dr. Judy? And as you continue to talk, I'll bring it up on the screen.
I'll do it because it's slide 6 that I wanted to show you, Jason.
Is it not in this one at all? We can advance.
No, it's a brand new slide. So as we've testified each week,
Brand new. Okay.
as we've testified, I've been able to learn more and see more. So I literally made this slide just for this talk, where I was going to meet for the first time ever Dr. David Martin. And what I had done was I had taken the slide about the Vero monkey kidney cell lines that I tend to show in many of these conferences that I've been showing for decades. So the entire PowerPoint was one of talking about the very things I'm talking about, of Vero monkey kidney cell lines. It's so important in the testimony of that people understand that these bat tissues that Tony Fauci just in that last clip with Rand Paul, lied about. He has the knowledge about how these things are made, but he uses what we call plausible deniability to say he doesn't have anything to do with it. And he right there lied about the Vero monkey kidney cells and Reston, Virginia, and knowing that we did that work in the 90s. And that's what's important on this slide, if I can ever get it to you. But what's important about that in the 90s is that he was that in Reston, Virginia, we were doing the gain of function studies. Of course, it wasn't illegal at that time. And so, the difference in the Reston strain and the strain from Zaire in Africa was the cytokine storm. That is the exact cytokine storm of Ebola. And so what I'll do is I'll just take these two slides and email.
Take a moment, Dr. Judy, to concentrate and just send me those slides. You've educated the world to this cytokine storm, and if I understand what you've told us in the past, this is a provoked immune response where a vaccination causes a hyperactive immune system that can actually cause the recipient of an inoculation to have a fatal response when exposed to a pathogen in the wild. Is that understanding correct?
Let me break here to Kent. Kent wants to say something.
Yeah, so I'd like to respond to those videos. So one of the things that I just think is important for people to understand is that Dr. Judy and I, since the beginning of this pandemic, have been making two essential arguments. And for the last couple of days, whenever I turn on the news, I find myself yelling at the news because there's suddenly an outbreak of common sense. From the very beginning of this epidemic, Judy and I have been saying that the Wuhan Institute of Virology needs to be investigated.
Is that an emergency, Kent?
Needs to be investigated as the likely source from where this came. What happened to Dr. Mikovits and myself upon saying that in videos, in articles that we written, we were driven from all of social media. We were attacked by the New York Times, Rolling Stone, Washington Post. I watch the TV now, and all I hear is the exact same thing that Judy and I were saying 14 months ago. This is probably the greatest absurdity in world history, that we can ask these questions, that somehow it's racist to say that this virus may have come from a Chinese lab, but somehow it's not racist to say it came from a Chinese wet market located just a few miles away. So first of all, the media owes Dr. Mikovits and myself an apology for maybe the greatest sin against public knowledge that has ever existed in world history. That is the level at which this exists. Secondly, from the very beginning, Dr. Mikovits and I have been saying that Dr. Anthony Fauci is not a person to be trusted. We have detailed our disagreements with Dr. Fauci and his integrity, and the world itself has been seeing the incompetence and the lying of this man. So the two things that we've been saying, that the lab needs to be investigated, that the mixing of animal and human tissue for re-injection into human beings, or as likely happened in this case, it just escaped from whatever way they were trying to maintain it, causing the greatest pandemic in over 100 years. And I do not understand why the media is not asking these questions that we've been asking for the past 14 months. And lastly, what we're here about is talking about Anthony Fauci. Anthony Fauci is not the idiot he is pretending to be in these hearings. He knows all of these things. So Dr. Fauci is somebody who needs to be investigated. I don't understand. Well, I do understand. The media is bought off by Big Pharma. Big Pharma is behind all of this kind of research. So Big Pharma has bought our media and it's bought our politicians. And thank goodness that something is finally changing. I don't know what it is. Somebody behind the scenes is saying, we have to tell the truth. Maybe it's because the fate of the world, the fate of the United States, the fate of humanity rests on finding the answer to these questions. So I am thrilled with what's happening. I'm worried that what's really going on, is something still that I don't fully understand. I don't know who's behind all of this. All I'm saying is for 14 months, Judy and I have been driven out of the public debate. It is time to bring us back into the public debate. We will debate Anthony Fauci, Bill Gates, the Chinese, anywhere, anytime. So with that, I will turn it back over.
You'll be more than debating. You'll be witnesses at the
trial.
Dr. Anthony Fauci and the Chinese, and you're involved in our criminal case in The Hague, Holland, that we filed, and Jason's going to put that up later, which the Europeans have sat on now for a year and a half. They're gutless. They don't want to move either. They're frightened of China. China owns most of Europe, for that matter, the United States and every place else. So they don't move on that. And coupled with the fact that the media is primarily leftist, so they have a nervous reaction when a conservative, a person of faith, or someone who isn't a leftist like them comes out with the truth, because frankly, they have more affinity to the communists in Beijing than they do to the American people. That's who they are. And that's who's in control of this country right now. So you're going to have lots of opportunity here, and that helps explain it. As far as Rand Paul is concerned, again, he stops just short. Excuse the sexual analogy. Don't hold it against me. But he reaches the point of climax, but never actually climaxes. Okay.
Yeah.
This may be a cover-up. It's obviously a cover-up. We know it's a cover-up. And Fauci just committed perjury again, and we're going to add that to our indictment. Lying under oath. Okay, because to withhold material information is as bad as giving false information, and he's done both. Yeah. And that's where we are.
Dr. Judy's slides ready now, if we'd like to
Great.
proceed. Dr. Judy, take it away.
All right. So thank you. I'm not going to show all of these slides, but I made this talk, as I mentioned, specifically after, because last Friday night, I met Dr. David Martin of Plandemic Indoctrination for the first time. And we got a chance to sit down and compare notes. And oh man, did I learn a lot this weekend. At any rate, this slideshow, I particularly made slide 5, so you can just pen through the slides. But if you walk through them very quickly through the next slide, and in fact, in the first slide, what I was talking about is what we see in COVID-19. So I appreciate what Rand Paul is doing, because to get your head around, let's go all the way back to the first slide. If you can go backwards, Jason. So what I said about our last book, it's written a scholar's obligation in an age of corruption, is the only way we're going to end this, because we can't have scholars in any field lying to us. And you can see the FDA, the CDC, the NIH, and the DOJ, the Department of Justice, conspired over the past decades. And I will use the term cover up because they've covered up. They've walked through using the exact same playbook. If you go to the next slide, you see the playbook started back in HIV, as we know. So Fauci and Gallo are culpable for HIV. And it's very important because, as Kent's written in his book Inoculation, and as we detailed in Plague of Corruption, and will detail more of that information in Ending Plague, a lot more, as Frank Rossetti knows, most of it being the contemporary of Fauci. But what was important about Fauci in the 80s is they drove medicine away from natural products and simple healings that could cure and could stop the epidemic, and they spread it with vaccines, particularly the hepatitis vaccine. And when the blood supply was found to be contaminated, then it was a real problem, because at that time, at the height of HIV/AIDS in 1991, that's why I showed Magic Johnson's picture, it was only 1 million Americans. This is 25 times that. So if you read the introduction of Plague by Hillary Johnson, the foreword by Hillary Johnson, and then my letter that came out only in the paperback, that new front material in the paperback discusses how I figured out after. Literally, this is 2017. Kent and I worked from 2011, right when I got out of jail, until 2014. The book was published first in hardback, November 18th of 2014. So I learned, only during the summer about Brian Hooker and about vaccines. And so, but in 2011, this cartoon about the mouse virus is getting into humans. And so this was the book Plague, was about plague of corruption. Well, Tony Fauci withdrew all the grant money from us forever and gave it to criminals who covered this up. And this is detailed, and the DOJ covered it up in vaccine court, where every single case we witnessed had cytokine storm. We saw the flu vaccine killing people. We saw the co-infections killing people. But perhaps the most important slide is the next slide, or the next two slides. So this is what I was talking about, Ebola Reston. This was the fraud that was perpetrated by Tony Fauci when the Ebola that killed 21,000 Liberians in Sierra Leone was driven by a Gates, let's just say, vaccine program. I don't know who funded all of that, but the book we discussed in Plague of Corruption is called Called for Life. Well, that doctor there is Kent Brantley. And so what you see here in the left on the inset, the doctor got infected, but he was in bleach. He was covered. We were told, just like in HIV, it's only blood and body fluid contact. It's not contagious. So when Kent Kent Brantley, and Nurse Nancy, who were the people who were doing the detoxing, when those people realized that it was transmitted through the air, that you could, because people were becoming sick or getting symptoms who never had any contact. And basically in that book, what you see is Dr. John, and I'm going to say his name for the purpose of this testimony because it matters. Dr. John Fankhauser actually cured Kent Brantley and stopped this Ebola spread. Through the world. He cured him with, as soon as they thought there might be a chance he got infected, they gave him saline infusions, hydroxychloroquine, put him in a dark, calm place and prayed over him. You can read every word of this. And then the little boy survived, and they gave him convalescent serum. So if you recall, back in the summer of 2014, right when William Thompson had confessed and Senator Posey was bringing this to Congress about the MMR 3 RNA viruses, vaccines hurting Blacks and Hispanics, the cover up of that 2001 or 1999 to 2001 paper that William Thompson was on, and how the CDC and everybody got together and had a little data burning party. That's all in books told. Frankly, so we have a little problem in 2014, the movie Vaxxed, he's caught, everything comes out. And here's CDC. What they say about Ebola spreading through the air. It's okay, folks, you can go home. Measles goes 6 feet, but Ebola only goes 3 feet. What are we thinking about all of this social distancing and isolation? So Tony Fauci deliberately covered this up, and you can see the Obama administration was full in knowledgeable about this, because what did they do to Kent Brantley? They put him on one of these planes and they drove it to the CDC, and Tony Fauci stood on TV and next to Obama, and how we, the CDC, cured everybody. No, you didn't. And here's Harold Varmus in 1999 at the beginning of the xenotransplantation program. Xenotransplants, vaccines, injections of animal tissue, animal cell line, nucleic acid, other human cell line, that xenotransplantation. And right there and then they said you can get a highly pathogenic virus transmitted to a new species. These are how they're spreading out of labs. And then, so yeah, I'll answer you, Ken.
Yeah, so what I think is important to understand is Tony has been in charge of public health since. So as we go through HIV and we see the millions died unnecessarily because what he was doing is he was pushing unproven therapies for financial gain when easily available natural alternatives could have helped dramatically. We've had Tony Fauci lie about autism and the connection with vaccines. We've had Tony Fauci lie about Ebola. And now the world is seeing Tony Fauci lying about COVID-19. What Tony Fauci has done in the 37 years in which he has been at the pinnacle of public health is he has deformed scientific investigation and public health. Our public health has declined so dramatically since 1984 because what we have done as a society, as a government, is we have put a few government scientists at the top of a pyramid of immense government funding. It's not an accident that Big Pharma has been able to deform scientific and medical investigation for their own financial benefit.
Correct.
Tony Fauci is a symptom. He's the symptom that needs to be dealt with first, okay? Because he's the symptom that's going to kill so many people, just like the cytokine storm. But after we deal with this symptom, we need to reform science. And I hope that's something that we will bring out in these public hearings.
Right. So exactly, Kent. So if you get to that next, go back to that slide, and then we'll get to the key slide. Because see, what's important about this is it's released from the air. It just doesn't escape the lab. So that with Kent and Amber Brantley, that was planned. That cell line, viral monkey kidney cells, you just ship it around the world. That's what we make our polio vaccines in. So again, as I believe I said last week very clearly, if Tony Fauci wasn't knowingly doing something, and the rest of the government between Reston, Virginia, and Fort Detrick, and at Reston, Virginia, that's the CIA. I just want you to know. We have people who were there right then, and that is the CIA.
And Langley, Reston, it's right next to each other. I lived there too.
Correct. And
Great
so
call.
if we go to that, so again, this was 2014, suddenly a strain that had 300 mutations, and everybody was told in 2014, oh, they forgot how to cook their bat soup. This language doesn't change. And then they spun the narrative away from the Thompson confession because everybody was worried about contagious Ebola. And Tony Fauci spun the narrative away just as he did with the XMRVs. And they literally, the spike protein, the cell line, the viral monkey kidney cell line has the XMRVs. We've been spreading them through the polio vaccines. We know that. So here's the next slide. Slide 5 is the slide I made just for Tony Fauci and Dave Martin. In that PowerPoint behind you, Jason?
That's number 5, Dr. Judy. Is that not the right one?
That's it. Okay, so here you go from our testimony last week. And it's all here. Everything I just said is in Plague of Corruption, or will be in Ending Plague, because it goes all the way back to HIV, as Kent just said. We've been experimenting on humans. He's been trying to see if they could take advantage of genocide of certain cultures, of certain people, since the murder of millions with HIV. And when the honest scientists caught up and found that it was the monocyte macrophage, just the molecular biology of it, and they couldn't hide it anymore. All of a sudden, we don't hear of AIDS anymore. And now HIV envelope is in the spike protein. And now XMRV envelope, another word for that is our own endogenous syncytin, that makes cells and everything else stick together like Velcro. Yep. So here you have the dangers of use of animal tissues in vaccines. So we found the blood supply contaminated on May 29th, 2011 was the first time I published or presented in public how heavily contaminated the blood supply was, and how important it is that the envelope protein alone. So we know, as this came from last week, so Fauci perjured himself to Rand Paul. There he is pictured in the inset. He's pure Satan. This is pure evil. He's not an idiot. He's Satan. And here are the cell lines, and they're in all of the shots. And so what the work does, and what Tony Fauci did, how did they respond in the last 2 weeks? The cabal media, how did they respond? Oh, all through the internet. Now, instead of censoring me and censoring Luc Montagnier, who is featured in our book in great detail, Ending Plague, because he and Frank know all the truth, as we confirmed Luc Montagnier's isolation of HIV all the way back in 83 and 84, where Fauci took credit for that. all the way back then. We knew HIV didn't cause AIDS, just like we know SARS-CoV-2, number one, never was a human infection. It's a monkey infection, vero monkey cells. That is not a human infection. They have not done the isolation transmissibility from a person with disease. So all they say is asymptomatic carrier. Why? Because they've injected by infection. So this Sunday, a fake piece of media went out where Luc Montagnier was said to say, "There's no hope. Everyone's going to die." And I sent this back to Dr. Sherry Tenpenny. She texted me after she left the meeting, and she said, "Judy, did that happen?" And it's an absolute lie, and it's an absolute. And it goes back to the details of what he did say. He didn't say it, number one. And what he did say is, if it was back a talk he actually gave. He actually gave that talk in September of 2020, knowing full well about contaminated cell lines and how they are parts of these injections. And so again, we're being censored off. We're being censored off of everything else. And yes, that's the same word that Gert van den Bosch said, that it's unthinkable to inject when you've already, when the horse is already out of the barn. When you've already had the disease, you're going to be more susceptible to antibody dependent enhancement. And
Judy?
so, yeah.
Let me add, let me just
hold on. Let me ask you a question of clarification. Could you, in your professional opinion, tell me your expected rate of problems from people who get the COVID-19 shot?
In my opinion, there's a susceptible population slide on that PowerPoint, and that gives you the scientific opinion of why. It's slide number 7, and it's the populations with the asterisks. Have evidence of either HIV, HTLV1, HBRV, XMRV, other viruses, or those immune deficiencies, those comorbidities, those co-inflammatory diseases, that's going to be between 6%. So at the end of our studies, the fraudulent MBio study by Lipkin was funded by Fauci and ordered by Francis Collins, who you both heard just lie there. And so that's going to be between 12% of 6 and 12% of the country, and probably I would say 15%. So I would say between 25 and 50 million Americans will die, and it will be those who have been injured by vaccines and who are carrying these deadly viruses that have been lied about by Fauci by 30.
Let me interject here as a layman, or shall we say a Klayman, okay? Is that Rand Paul earlier in the week, they asked him if he had taken the vaccine, and he said no. And they asked him why. And he said, because I already had COVID-19. So he obviously recognizes what you're saying.
Correct.
That he's extremely susceptible to a very violent reaction and potentially even death.
But there are what Luc Montagnier said back in September was, if you got the flu shot, remember the paper, you're 36% more likely to get COVID. There are at least 5 coronaviruses in the maiden Darby kidney cell line that went to the vaccine that went to Switzerland, in Italy. And then the vaccines in this country, the flu vaccines, that's why I put chicken eggs on that slide, on slide 5, because every flu shot, and we knew in 2017 and 18, a serious cough was in that flu season, probably a SARS type virus. And again, all of these viruses are in vero monkey kidney cells, and they've been in those cells for 25 to 30 years. They can release the strain du jour. This is the point. But the more important point from why Luc Montagnier wouldn't say that, nor would I, is because we cured AIDS. We cured Kent Brantley, Ebola, contagious Ebola. We don't have to worry about the common cold, which is what Rand Paul just said. You know, this isn't the deadly virus, but if we set people up with these immunizations. So what Luke and I said last year is, please don't wear the mask and don't get a flu shot, and you'll never see COVID-19 again. You won't see the second wave, and you won't get the antibody dependent enhancement. So some have already died, those with the XMRVs, that's 6%, those with HIVs, I don't know what that number is in this world because we don't count that one. And those other with vaccine injuries, the kids with the mitochondrial inflammatory diseases. So it's really all right there, the stories we've been telling. So everything Tony Fauci told the world to do, flip-flopped on, lied on, it's all very funny, is killing people. So it's the murder.
And here's the point that you're making and Kent's making. Okay, is that the issue is a lot bigger than COVID-19. And all of the truth with regard to all of these different strains of viruses have not come out.
Correct.
And the American people don't know what the side effects are, short-term, medium, and long-term of the vaccines. And Rand Paul, who is a medical doctor educated at my alma mater, Duke, and practiced for quite a long time himself, will not take the vaccine. So this is where we are. I might point one out other thing, because Kent was asking, why is it that he's been drowned out and you've been drowned out and other people have been drowned out? You won't find Judy Mikovits, Kent Heckenlively, Larry Klayman, Jason Goodman, nearly all of my clients on Fox News, because we told the truth. And it's convenient for Fox News right now to publish this because its ratings are sinking faster than a rock. They needed something else. Thank God the profit motive is now allowing this to come out. Thank God the Republican Party, which has been flat on its back, needs something to give itself some oxygen. But that's where we are. Now, when we chose to tell the truth with Eric Bolling on Sinclair, and I like Sinclair, and I like the owners of Sinclair, and you appeared, and you can find that video at freedomwatchusa.org, is that CNN attacked you, Media Matters attacked you, owned by George Soros, because Soros, is a worshiper of Mao and China and others, and so are the people that work for him. And Bolling and Sinclair were shamed into taking it down. I have sued CNN for that. That suit is ongoing. Okay, so we're going to hold everybody accountable. I dare them to take action right now to prevent the truth from coming out, and they'll be indicted too, frankly. So that's where we are. And next week,
and very importantly, what America needs to know is not another shot ever. Any shot, any flu shot can cause this antibody-dependent enhancement. And we see it every year in the flu shots and the same kind of death. We need to stop everything and show the world these shots are killing innocent people. And as Kent said, destroying. So this is, if it stops now, we can heal all of this. This is so important. Everything, complete moratorium. If these serial felons, the pharmaceutical companies, the liability, the immunity given to them in the corrupt vaccine court, which covers this up. 1 in a million, 1 in a million. No, it's not 1 in a million. It's 1 in 10.
And one point,
life-threatening injury.
One thing to point out, Judy, which is in your book, is that these vaccine courts, you see the government, you want to use the term loosely, government, we're going to be declaring a new government on January 5th and 6th. They have given immunity, Democrats and Republicans, to these big pharma companies. So when a case is filed, big pharma doesn't care. They can experiment, they can do whatever they want, they can kill millions. It doesn't really matter because they're not held accountable. But who pays? You, the American taxpayer, because what is the percentage? of the claims that are paid out, it's well over 80%, isn't it? Which is a validation of what you've been saying, that there is merit to these claims.
Right. Well, that was done until 2011. And there's a court case called the Brushewitz decision in 2011. Oh, why was that important in 2011? Because those slides I just showed, when is there liability? When you have a manufacturing defect. What is the manufacturing defect? You can't make any one of those vaccines you make in animal or human cell lines. That's all of them. That's your manufacturing plant. It's done. When we showed that xenotransplantation that Harold Varmus said in 1999 could happen, an injection of a vaccine is xenotransplantation. You're putting another human or another being's DNA, RNA, even a plant is GMO, genetically modified, can change and destroy your genome. And this is why they are liable. So they did the Brushewitz decision in the corrupt Supreme Court. And they silence everybody to tell the awards, except me. I never silenced. I didn't sign anything that said I'd let a corrupt court get away with anything. So I will make every single case that we opined on public, so you can see the corruption in the DOJ.
Go ahead, and then I'm going to wrap it up for this session, because I think we need to continue this next week if the two of you are available. I want to bring Dr. Francis Boyle on as well to testify about the bioweapon aspect of this, and I want to get into that as well, why it's most likely a bioweapon.
So I just want to spend a minute or two on the Brushewitz versus Wyeth Labs case. It was in front of the Supreme Court. What they did was, up until that time, childhood vaccines given to kids, people under the age of 18, were covered by the vaccine court. What Brushewitz versus Wyeth did was it took that language and it said, now all vaccines, all adult vaccines, are in the child vaccine court. It made no sense. The only two justices who stood up were Sonia Sotomayor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And you know, I'm a conservative, so I'm not usually given to complimenting the other side. But the dissent of Sonia, who said, how can you take 17 words in which it said this applies to childhood vaccines given to people under the age of 18, and makes it, he applies it to all adult vaccines. She thought it was the greatest power grab she'd ever seen. So, Mr. and Mrs. America, I want you to understand this. It's not just childhood vaccines that the companies have complete immunity for. It's everything right now. So, this is where the pressure needs to be brought to bear.
This gets to the point why our citizens' grand juries are important, why the information that comes out here is important. It's going to be disseminated widely. I ask everybody who is viewing this to share it with people that you know, not just the grand jurors themselves. This is public. Everything should be public. People need to be informed, and we need to be informed further. But the reality is that there's a tremendous profit incentive by big pharma, these companies, Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, to make money, to hide from the American people just how dangerous these vaccines are. And then from the standpoint of the politicians, they have to offer something to the American people to get reelected, to say, we saved you. Doesn't matter whether they're Democrat or Republican. And then you've got, all over TV. It's part of this whole Fourth Reich type phenomenon right now. You've got every major entity in society, whether it's sports leagues, whether it's labor unions, whether it's corporations, with public service announcements that you have to take the vaccine, telling the American people that if you don't do it, you're not patriotic and you're a threat to other Americans. And this is what's the problem is, because this is just the beginning, in my opinion. It's not the end. Okay, this won't be the last pandemic. And now the terrorists have an idea on how they can do this on the cheap. So this is why we better get it right now, because we're going to be facing other threats such as this one. I mean, it's so far-fetched, in people's minds as to what's going on, but it's not far-fetched at all. I mean, it's almost like War of the Worlds. Of course, we're going to get a report on UFOs in a few days anyway. Well, at least the aliens seem to be friendly, but our own government is not. So in any event.
And Larry, just to sum, you're exactly right. And sum all that up, who's been at the helm all along is Tony Fauci.
Yeah, well, maybe we can put him on Mars, and that would be the punishment. Who knows?
Call Elon Musk, Larry.
So I'm going to wrap this up right now. Hopefully we can convene it next week. I want to keep people focused. I don't want them to phase out. We're going to have Dr. Francis Boyle. We'll have you on again. This needs to be dealt with. It needs to be priority number one for the American people to know, and we need to bring about justice. These people need to be held accountable. I will be seeking Fauci's indictment. I'll be seeking the indictment of the Communist Chinese Politburo. The individual members will be seeking the indictment of the so-called scientists at the Wuhan lab, which are more like, as I said, along with Fauci, Dr. Frankenstein, or is it Frankenstein, than real doctors. And they've created a monster which has literally brought the world to the virtual near end. So this is where we are. With regard to the preliminary findings that I sent to you last week, grand jurors send them back, but I'll be augmenting them with counts for perjury and other related counts against Fauci in particular. Thank you for your participation. What you're doing is extremely valuable. And again, everybody who's watching, share this far and wide. The leftist-controlled media cannot keep us from telling the truth. It doesn't matter whether it's communist China, United States, Israel, or any place else. We're going to get the truth out to the American people. Listen to my radio show this week with our Israeli colleagues at freedomwatchusa.org. We talk about this as well. This is just the beginning. It's not the end. I want to thank all of you for your participation. Jason, you can wrap it up.
And before we go, Larry, I just want to ask all of our jury members and our viewing audience to pause for a moment and just consider how important this is. Without independent media and the ability for us to convey the thoughts, the testimony of experts like Dr. Judy Mikovits and Kent Heckenlively, we would never know about this information. The pharmaceutical companies and the various powerful entities that sponsor the corporate news that are telling us all this stuff would hide this information from you. And I just can't thank Dr. Judy or Kent enough for remaining persistent in the face of opposition. I want to make sure that people remember to sponsor Larry and his team at Freedom Watch, because without their persistence, we wouldn't be having these citizen grand juries. So please visit freedomwatchusa.org and click on the donate button. I also want to thank each of the citizens grand jury members for your participation in this very important and historic event. Don't forget to purchase Plague of Corruption to learn more about this. Dr. Judy, you are incredibly brave. Thank you for your testimony. And thanks everyone for watching. Have a great day. We'll see you next week for another hearing